be working in my own test database, which has a very large number of your records in it. And I do apologize if my database is a little slow with the 60,000 records in it. It's not a production database, so it's not as responsive as databases that have nice big server hardware behind them. With Michel's permission, I'm probably also going to nip into his database for a few minutes when we get to talking about using saved searches, just because I don't have them all set up in my database, and I need another spot to go and show what those look like. So I've been preparing, I should say, can everyone, I'm going to show my screen now, and if anyone has any difficulty reading my screen, you should let me know and I'll adjust the size. Okay, does anyone have any trouble reading that screen? Is it too big? Because I can make it smaller. Hand up will tell me to make it smaller. Okay, I'm going to assume we're okay. I will be making reference to two documents today. One of them is an in-progress document that I hope that you'll all receive. Following this webinar, I, at minimum, will post it up on the resources site and send a link out on the alert list so that you have access to it. It's a summary of the topics we'll be talking about today. And the other is one many of you may have already seen, and that is the start from scratch. I've never classified any of my data type of document. It's very, very detailed and very, very complex. And so we're hoping to give you a lighter document that is easier for you to manage in moving forward working with this information, because we know that that document is overkill for what you're doing now and really hard to process because there's just so much information in it. But I do want to make sure that you know I'm referring to a couple of specific documents. I may show you the documents during the call, bring one of them up now. This is one I have in progress that I'll be mainly using today. Contains a little bit of information from the more detailed document, like the types of records that you're going to encounter. And it also has some new information about, do I have to have a separate agency record? What do I do with agencies outside my catchment? When do I need to have a separate site record? All of these nice practical questions that I'm sure that you all would like to have answers to. If I don't cover your question today, just ask, and I'm happy to do anything I can to respond to your specific issue. So we'll start from the very beginning, and that is the first thing that you need to know when working in this format is an understanding of how the agencies in your database are structured. There are a few common formats that an agency may fall under. 4, in fact, that I explain in this document and in the more detailed document. And I'm going to go through each one and try and give you a sense of what those records look like in your database and what they will look like when they're classified in an agency site service format. So we'll start with the most basic kind of record, which luckily for everyone represents almost half of the records in everybody's databases. And that is something we'll call a standalone record. A standalone record is incredibly easy to find and maintain because it's a single record that represents an agency, its only site, and its only service that it provides. And in the model that we've decided to go with in CIOC, you will continue to maintain a record like that as one record. You will not have to maintain it in 3 pieces. So the actual process of managing the record for a standalone record is not going to change for you at all. Once it's been classified as an agency site service record, meaning you've said this record contains agency information, site information, and service information, that's it. You're done. No further classification work needs to be done on it in terms of its structure. There are some new fields that will be coming into use over the next year, some of them very soon, and that is some new naming and description fields. And those you will make use of in a record like this, a standalone record, because you'll want to distinguish between the name of the agency, the name of its site location, which may be main location or central location or whatever the naming standards dictate for this name of the site, and also the name of the service that that agent provides, or agency provides. So that will be different in that you'll be breaking up what you used to keep into in a single field, such as one name field, will now be in 3 different fields because you'll be naming the agency, the site, and the service differently. And the description will also vary. So you'll use your regular description field to capture the details about the service that's being provided. And you'll use 2 new fields, the site description and the agency description, to provide separate descriptions of those parts of the record. So any general information about the agency will be captured separately from the information about the service that that agency provides. Any questions so far? So the bottom line is these standalone records are almost, the maintenance of them is almost exactly the way that you do it today. And any new records that you create that are of this type, where you have an agency operating out of a single location and providing one major service, the process is very simple, and I'll find one of them now here. So I can give you an example of what that looks like. Find an agency site service record. I'm going to have a lot of them, so I probably should have picked fewer. Okay, so I'll pick just any general one here. And it's loading my 57,000 records. It's great. And you can see this is an agency site service record. It is not a record that has any other sites and services for the same agency. When I'm actually editing this record, there are a total of 3 new fields that will apply. One is the agency site service field, which says what kind of a record this is. I'm going to call it an agency, a site, and a service. The next new field for me to deal with is the service name field. My former org level 1 through 5 have been renamed here as the agency name. I now have my service name field, so I'm going to call, because I'm being simple here, I'm going to say that the service name is the same as the agency name. You will have to pick an appropriate service name according to the standards you're working with. And then finally, I need to provide a site name, because this is also a site record. So I will call it downtown. I'm just making up a name here. That would be the, and I've missed the description field, my apologies. So the name field is one, and then the site description and the agency description become available to you if it is an agency and a site record. So I'll go back in again. In your database right now, most of what has been filled in is only the agency site service information and not the site names or the extra descriptions. So don't worry that that hasn't been done. That's sort of a further phase of the work that is to be done, but it's something to be aware of when you're updating records over time. So let's look for agency description. You can see I have an agency description field. That lets me provide a description for the agency itself, separate from the services that it provides. And then I also have a site description, which again provides a description of the physical location, separate from both the description of the agency and the service that it provides. Number one question is, what on earth do I put in for a site description? For those of you working in Ontario, there will be specific instructions provided to you about what to put in this field. If in doubt, you can put something extremely simple like site location for, and then put whatever the agency name is. That's may be all that you end up putting in as the description of the site. So don't feel that you have to provide some kind of lengthy prose describing the site in any way. If you don't have any particularly meaningful information to impart, it may be sufficient to give this type of a brief description of the site. So that is the entirety of the maintenance of what we call our standalone records. There's nothing more complex than that, nothing special about it. Generally, any record that already exists is going to already be classified agency at site service. For all of you who have already been working with the new classification in your database, so it will just sit there already classified. Over time, you'll be looking to fill in service names, site names, site descriptions, and agency descriptions. But most of you will not have any of those fields in use yet, and that's fine. So we'll move on to the next kind of record, and it's sort of the next most simple record, and that is a single location that has multiple services. Just one sec, because there's a hand up. I need to make sure. I think the hand up is... I'm going to put the hand down. If anyone still has a question, you can go ahead and raise your hand, and I'll be on the lookout. So the next most complex kind of record is an agency that operates out of one location but offers multiple distinct services. So in this case, you're going to end up with more than one record that are connected in some way. Relationships between records come in a couple of different formats. One is the relationship of an agency to its sites and services. And on all my diagrams, you'll see that here with the little blue arrows. That indicates that there's a connection in the database between a record and its parent agency. And the other kind of relationship you'll see is the relationship between a service and its service delivery location, otherwise known as its site. So those are the two possible ways that records can be linked together. In this particular example, we're using both. So we're linking both of these services up to their parent agency, which in this case is also used as the site record. So this is also used as the official place for the information about the one location in which this agency offers services. And then I have additional records that describe different services that this agency provides. So this can occur in a number of different incarnations. I don't want you to think that this is always what it looks like. So it's possible that you could have an agency record, a separate site record, and 3 separate service records. There are lots of different ways that this can be organized, but the fundamental understanding of what kind of record this is an agency that only operates one site location but operates more than one service. So it won't necessarily look exactly like this, but I'd like in your head for you to keep that kind of a picture of what the organization looks like. So the most critical thing about a record like this is that we must identify a single site. So site records should never be duplicated in the database. You should never have more than one record identified as a site for the same physical location. A little bit later I'll get into reasons why you might have similar services in different records, but you should never ever have more than one even an agency record. There are reasons why you might have an agency split into multiple records. There's never ever a reason that you should have sites split into multiple records. There should only be one instance of a site for each agency. For those of you who are totally unfamiliar with how the classification work is gone, you might be thinking, but I have the same address listed in 10 different records. So how does that work? The way that it works right now is exactly one of those records has to be chosen as the site, the official site record. Which one you choose to be the site record is potentially up for debate. Someone obviously with the records that you have now has made a choice about which record is going to be the official site record, and it may not be an ideal configuration, but only one record, hopefully, is identified as a distinct site for each physical location that that agency operates. A little bit later, I'm going to get into sort of the ideal organization of which records should be the site and how you should organize this. But you can see from my diagram here that in general I would recommend in a single location multiple service that the agency record is an agency site record, that this is the master agency record and the master site record, and that your separate records are each only classified as services. What does this look like? So do a quick search here for a record like this. How do I find a record like that? Again, I'm going to use I'm in my advanced search, I'm going to use my checklist tool. I'm going to search for a record that is a service and is not a site. Okay, so these are records that are only services and not site locations. I'll pick one of them. Okay, so in an instance like this, any service record that's just a service should already be linked to a site. And you can see down here it is. So here is the site record to which this service record is attached. I'll open that. In this case, we have an agency site service record, but it could have been potentially just an agency site record, as I was talking about. And this one, although you can see that it's repeating in the record right now, the address information, it should be the same as the address information in the site that it's linked to. So you can see they're both at 2080 Trinity Church Road. So even though you have multiple records in the database that have the same address at the moment, only one of them should be identified as the official record describing that site. And in this record, I will not fill out site names. I will not fill out site descriptions or any other information about the site. It's acceptable to continue to have the address information in these service-only records, and it's in fact necessary right now because until we get to a point where we automatically pull in the site record information into the service record, you're not going to be able to accurately find your records unless you continue to duplicate the address information in that service record. Just that there's a question here. There's a question about the description fields not showing up until after you've designated the record as an agency, site, and service. So while you are editing the form, I'll go into this record as an example. At the moment, this is not designated as an agency record. And so an agency description is not required without this being designated as an agency record. As soon as you make it a site, you then are able to edit, like the name fields for site appear and the name fields for service appear after you designate it as that type of record. Should be site description. I thought that the description fields were hiding if you didn't have it filled out for site, but you shouldn't have to reload the form. So that's the main question is, do you have to reload the form in order to get access to, say, the site description field? And that's not true. So if I go, again, to do site description, it shouldn't even be there. But it should automatically show and hide the field on the form for you. You don't have to say submit it as a site record and then edit the record again to edit the site name or the site description. Just clicking and unclicking the checkbox is enough to make the field show up. So you can see here it says service name. I can't actually take the service out because it's being used that way, but if I did site, you could see with site name, here it's visible, and as soon as I take site off, it's grayed out. I can't edit it. So it's on the form, but it's not editable because this is not a site record. As soon as I tick that box, this site name field becomes enabled, and I can provide data in that field. So I don't actually have to submit the form in order to get access to that field. As long as I say at the top, this is a site, immediately I get access to that field. Okay. I'm going to quickly go through the last two types of records, and then I want to get into the more practical aspect of actually editing the records and some of the specific decisions that you're going to have to be making. So there are two more kinds of agencies that you will encounter. The next is the case of an agency that offers a single service, but from multiple locations. So this is almost exactly like the last scenario in terms of how the records are organized, but in reverse. So many locations, one service. And in this case, you may have a record that is an agency service record. You may have an agency, a separate service record. So I'm not dictating how the records are actually organized here, but just the need to identify for every agency which of these four scenarios that particular agency operates under, because it helps you to make decisions about how the records. So if I've identified that I have an agency that offers one service at multiple locations, this is the kind of record that I'm dealing with, and that should help me make decisions about how I want to organize the records for that agency. And then finally, we have incredibly complicated records with multiple services and multiple sites. And those can end up being incredibly difficult to maintain if they're not structured correctly, because you can end up with an absolute mishmash of records classified in many different ways. So a record like this generally needs thorough review and is most likely to be in need of restructuring to simplify the data management process moving forward. Although you may have been able, or someone in your database may have been able to go in and properly classify all of your existing records without reorganizing the records in any way, not creating any new records, not splitting records up, just classifying them. The maintenance of that record are set. The maintenance of the records by the agency may be really difficult because of the way that it's organized. So you'll find over time that records that fall into this last category, the multiple locations and services, are most likely going to need some serious attention and possibly revision in order to make them easier to maintain over time. I'm going to talk about how you can do that and sort of what's going on with that. So that's a basic introduction of the four types of records. I haven't intended yet to tell you how to update them or recommendations for what to do with them or anything. I just want you to have an understanding at this point of the different kinds of agencies that you'll be running across. And whenever you're doing your data management, you should be considering every agency in terms of which one of these four categories it falls under. So it's either a standalone record, one agency, one site offering one service, an agency with one location, multiple services delivered at that location, an agency that offers a single service but may deliver that service at multiple locations, and then very complex agencies that have multiple sites and services. So that's where I want you to be now, and something that you should have in your head whenever you're updating your record, creating new records, reviewing the records that you already have. So the next thing I want to talk about is the new fields. So we're going to start to get into the nitty-gritty of what the new fields are and what they do. Obviously, you've seen a little bit of it on the form by now, but I want to talk about each of the new fields and what their purpose is. You may or may not already have some of these fields on your forms, depending on how involved you've been in the process and whether these new fields have been added to the views that you personally work in. If you do not have the new fields added to your record display, to your forms, that's something that should happen as soon as possible, because in order to keep these records classified and in order, you need to be able to see all of this additional information that's part of these records now. The key fields that should be on every person who does data management, it should be in your views, are as follows. Number one, you should have the agency site service field. That is a bottom line requirement. You should understand how the record you're looking at is being classified. There are 4 possible values that can occur in this field. It can be an agency, a site, a service, or a topic, or a combination of those things. The only ones that are allowed to the only ones that are allowed to sort of stand alone are an agency, which doesn't obviously need to have a parent agency, and a topic, which doesn't, which sort of stands alone. So topics can be assigned to an agency, or they can almost exist independently. We have a special agency record that should be in all of your databases now that's called General Topics and Services. And it gives you a place to hang topic records on so that they're not orphaned if they're not associated with a specific agency. A topic record, if you're not familiar, would be a subject record, a record that is about subject matter rather than a specific service or site or agency. Topics can be associated with an agency, so it is acceptable to create a topic record that belongs to a particular agency, that is maybe some kind of a summary or explanation of something to do with that agency. A topic record can also be a research record or a record in progress where you're not yet prepared to provide a proper classification for that record, and you need a temporary holding zone in which to hold that type of record. One of the things you may decide to do if you maintain research records or in-progress records is to create a dummy agency for those records to allow you to group them together and keep track of them better. So if your organization keeps a lot of research records that aren't meant for public consumption, are in-progress records, by having a parent agency called research records under which you can store all of your research records and in-progress records. One, you can easily find all those records because they'll all be clustered together under the same parent. And 2, it allows you to keep your database in good classification order so that everything is classified. One of the main things that I've been hearing as feedback is that people don't, well, do I have to classify this record? It's not going to the website. This is a record in progress. I don't want to classify it yet. I understand the reasoning behind that and why that's necessary, but in order to keep the system in order and tidy and be able to run checks, making sure that everything in the system stays classified and in order, you can use techniques like creating a research record agency and storing all of these as topics under it to make sure that you are doing both things. You're recognizing that you're not yet ready to classify the record or flesh it out in the way it should be in its final form, but you're also not leaving your records in a state of being unclassified, which is going to cause all kinds of data quality checks to fail and make it more difficult to keep your database in order. So that's field number 1, agency site service. Every record should have it. The next field that every display should have is the new description field. So that's your org description, otherwise known as agency description, and site description, otherwise known as location description. Every record details page and update form should have those available so that you can see the content of those fields and be able to edit them, especially during your regular updating process of the record throughout the year. So even if you're not doing a big push to provide new description fields for all of these records, if you make sure that they're on all the data management forms and all the data management record details, then when someone is going to do a regular yearly update, they have the opportunity at that time to provide a proper agency description and site description. You can also add it to your feedback forms so that the agency themselves can provide that information at the time you're requesting an update. this record doesn't have either of those description fields. What that means as well, though, is that you should always be treating the existing description field as a service description field. It should never, from this point forward, have the general description of the agency, nor should it have any description of the particular site location or details specific to that site, because we do now have separate description fields that are intended to capture that information. So the general description field, which used to be the only one that you were using, should now be considered exclusively as a service description field. Name fields never need to be added to record display forms. That's because name fields are always displayed automatically with the record. So you never are going to have to add the service name or site name fields to your record details page, because the names will always be displayed automatically. But you do need to add them to your update forms and to your feedback forms. And it's important to do that as soon as you begin using those fields. If you do not make sure that all of your data management views and all of your feedback forms have all of the name fields, then you're not going to be able to adequately update that information for your records. If your feedback form, for instance, was missing the service name field and you sent out a request for update and they couldn't actually see or edit the service name field, they wouldn't be able to provide you with adequate feedback on the service name and give you what the service name should be or provide updates to it. So it's crucial that those name fields must go on both all the data management forms in your database and all the feedback forms in your database in which someone is able to edit or provide suggested updates for names. It has to start including those site and service names. There's a question. Okay, Michelle is indicating that for the Ontario Data Partners, the description fields are not a requirement yet. So as I had indicated before, the idea would be that that's something that's done over time and not something that's expected of you right away. So although it doesn't hurt to have those description fields on your forms, especially for you to get that information when you're providing your regular updates, the expectation is not yet there for you to provide that for all your records. And when the time comes that there is an expectation for service descriptions and agency descriptions, you would be being provided with data standards so you understood what kind of information you're supposed to be capturing when you fill those fields out. Okay, so name fields again, I'm going to go, I think most of you were probably at my name training last week, but I'll go in again anyway and just quickly discuss how all the name fields work. There are 3 new components to the names. 2 are obvious, the service name and the site name, and the third is less obvious, and that is the ability to display the parent agency name in your record automatically and have it be connected to that parent agency. So in this case, if I was coming in here and looking to provide a service name, I would be reviewing the name here. I can see Outreach Attendant Service is actually the name of the service. I would move that into the service name. I would leave Able Living in the agency name, but I may also decide that I want to pull the parent agency name from the parent agency record so that I don't have to maintain it anymore. What I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to say, okay, which record am I looking at, or am I using? I'm using HAMO 728. What is the name of that record? Able Living Bin Book Project. I would need to make sure that I actually wanted to use this as my parent organization name. In this case, I don't, because I don't want it to say Bin Book Project. And if I look at this record, Bin Book Project hasn't been put into a service name, meaning if I said display organization name and submitted it, which I'll do right now, I'm going to end up with Bin Book Project in my name. You can see right here, which is not what I want. Whereas if the parent agency record had proper naming work done on it, which I'll do right now, which is to move Binbrook Project into the service name. I'll just call it Binbrook location. Now if I reload, no longer says Binbrook location. Another neat trick has just happened here, though, that I want to draw your attention to. When I edited this record, I added a site location name, Glanbrook location, and you can see because this is connected, that's the service location right here. It's automatically also pulled the site name in for me. So I can now click on the site location name, bring up all the programs that occur at that location. And similarly, if I had two of the similar service, I'd be able to click on the service name and bring up all of the instances of that service at that agency. So again, the field I was trying to draw attention to is the ability to automatically display the parent organization name. If you have chosen a parent agency record number, you will get the ability to display a parent organization name if you wish. It's not mandatory to do so. And as soon as you do that, it automatically becomes tied to the agency name fields of that parent record. Okay, so again, you don't have to add those site name and service name fields to your record display because it happens automatically, but you do need to make sure that they get added to your data management forms, all of them, and your feedback forms, all of them. An offer went out to do this automatically for you. If whoever is in charge of administration of your database hasn't been in touch with me about getting the site and service names automatically added to your forms for you, you can certainly be in touch with me to have that work done. The next field that should be in every data management view is the parent agency name field. So there should always be an ability to see what the parent agency is. There are two versions of this field. One displays the parent agency record number, which is optional for you to have on your record display. You don't necessarily need to see the parent agency record number. And then there's the parent agency name field, which will actually link to the parent agency and display the name of the parent agency. You can get the record number from that field just by hovering your mouse over. You'll see in the lower corner down here, if I have my mouse over it, I can see the record number is HAM 0728. So there really isn't a need to put both of those fields on your form, but you can if you wish. So there's the org num field, and there is the org num details field, which will actually display the parent organization name and link to it. And that should be available on every record details page that's used by data managers, so that you, and you may even want to make it available in your public views and other places as well, but minimally it needs to be available to all your data managers so that they can quickly and easily see which agency record is associated with. There's a question about whether the program field is the same as the service field. So programs and services are used really interchangeably in terms of terminology that people tend to use. I'm trying to use the word service, but you may find that people interchangeably use the words programs and services. They fundamentally mean the same thing when we're describing programs that a service that an agency provides, or services that the agency provides. It's the same structural concept, so there's no difference. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but when I say service, I mean programs, and if someone says programs, they mean the services. It's all generally the same thing. Don't be misled by the titles of my field groups here, things like saying organization and program names. This is a customizable name, so it could say organization and service names. That's really up to whoever organizes the forms. We are going to be working towards standardizing the way that record details are displayed, at least in Ontario, so that everybody's forms and record details look very similar, and that we recommend specific terminology so that everyone is talking the same language. Get confusion like, why does this say program names and everywhere else says service name? That's the kind of thing we want to avoid by providing specific recommendations about how to name your fields, how to name and group your fields together. Okay, so recap, the fields you should have on your record details. You should have the agency site service field. You should have the organization and site description fields added to your record details and forms. You should have the parent agency number added to your entry forms, your record update forms. You should have the parent agency name, otherwise known as org num details, added to your record display form, your record details. You should have the site and service name fields added to your record update and feedback forms. This will all be in writing, so you do not need to remember what I'm telling you here. I just want you to be aware of it. Let's see, and yes, and then we get into the service location details fields. So the next thing that you'll want to have on your record details pages and your update forms are the service location and location services fields. It's actually the same field. The field location services is a way to tie a location to the services that are provided at that location. There is another version of the same field called service locations. So you can hear the distinction. One is location first, then services. The other is service first, then location. And that is just taking the same data and instead displaying all of the services at the location versus all of the locations for the service. Okay, so there are two versions of the same field, and which ones you see depend on the record that you're looking at. If I'm looking at a site record, then I would see the location services field. I would see all of the services that are provided at that site. If I'm looking at a service record, I would see all the sites at which that service is offered. So here I am. This is a service-only record, and I can see additional service sites. This is the location. It could be locations at which this service is offered. If I go into that location, the site, then I will see all of the services that are offered at this site. So there I can see my outreach attendance services, any additional services offered at the same site. On the record update form, this is what it actually looks like. So you edit it from the site information, and I see a list of all the sites that the agency provides. I can choose any of them to add as places that it's offered. So I can pick, if I wanted to say that this service was offered at this location here, I would click it, it would add it to my list. When I updated this record, I would see the full name and detailed information about that site. Okay, so it provides a list of all of the sites at the same agency, and I can choose any of them to say that the service information in this record is offered at that particular site. And finally, we have the agency sites and services fields. These are optional, but they can be they can be quite useful. I certainly find them extremely useful as a way to do a quick survey of all of the sites and services of an agency. So I strongly recommend that these be in all data management views. I don't particularly recommend them for the public, but you can also put them, the public versions of these fields, into public views. They're not editable because these fields are determined automatically based on which records have this agency record as a parent. So we don't edit the agency sites field. We don't edit the agency services field. It's determined automatically by accessing the list of sites and services that have this record as a parent agency. The reason these two fields are particularly useful is they provide an excellent overview of all of the sites and services that a particular agency provides. And I strongly recommend, actually, that this be the first place that you start whenever you're doing record updates, is by going into the agency record and reviewing the list of sites and services that are provided by that agency. It gives you a way to quickly assess if there are multiple sites that you need to be thinking about. Is this service offered at multiple sites? Will changing this site impact multiple services? It's a really good place to get an overview of how the information is structured. So by having this on your forms, you can really quickly go and use this as a quick assessment before you do any updating of the records to determine what the impact would be potentially of changes that you're going to make. That's it for the fields. Does anyone want to have more demonstration of the actual fields on the forms before I start getting into specifics about when to create specific kinds of records or how you should organize records? Because that's the section that I'm going to move into now. If I have moved too fast for people because you didn't know, you didn't have enough background in this information, I'm happy to review something in more detail. I didn't want to waste anyone's time if people were relatively familiar with the content. There's a question. No, I don't think there are any questions. Never mind. Okay. If I am going over your head, please don't be shy. Let me know. I'm going to assume right now that you have a basic understanding of what these fields are, and that if you need any assistance in figuring out how to get these fields on your form, you'll let me know. You'll be given a summary of the recommendation for which fields you should have on your forms. And which fields you must have on your forms. For instance, you must have the service name fields on your forms. You must have the agency site service field on the data management forms and so on in order to maintain this work. So we're going to talk about some very specific questions that I get about the classification. I'm going to start off with the, do I have to make separate agency records question, because this is one that I get frequently. So for now, it is not a requirement that you make a separate agency record. And when we talked about the 4 record types, I indicated that in complicated record, there is currently a real mishmash of what people have. We saw that in the record that I was just in, where this is an agency site service record, but it also has a whole bunch of other sites and services. And so the question is, well, should the agency record be independent? And my answer is usually yes in a situation like this, and I'll explain a bit about why and when. You don't have to do it, so that's the thing first off. You don't have to do it, but you may find that it gets very challenging to maintain the classification and to be orderly about your data management if you don't. And so because of that, it's something worth considering, but whether in these complex records you should be splitting off the agency into an entirely separate record. If the agency offers multiple services, but all from the same site, so if you recall, that's single location, multiple services, the recommended organization is to have an agency site record and have the service records be separate. So that's the official recommendation for the easiest way to maintain that information is you have one agency site record with no service information in it at all, and all of your services become separate records that are connected to the agency site record in terms of both the site and the agency. So again, if you identify this case, number 2, single location, multiple services, you don't have to do it this way, but the officially recommended way to do it at the moment to make your life easier is to have one agency site record and have all the services as separate records. So don't make an agency site service record and also a bunch of service records. Have all your services at the same level. So you're making a more structurally sound record. It will be easier to understand where the information is if you choose to make the parent record only an agency site record and all the services as separate records. Let's talk about another scenario. The agency offers a single service at multiple sites. So that's single program, multiple locations, this scenario here. What should you do in that scenario? So there's 2 ways to do that particular scenario. If the service is consistent at all the sites, I'm going to get into that in a minute, meaning that the service is exactly the same at every service delivery location, then you can make the parent record an agency service record and make a separate location for every site at which that record is offered. Okay, so that's one way to approach it. Again, that would be this scenario here, single program, multiple locations. And what is most likely to be easy for you to maintain if the service is consistent at every single site it's offered is to have the parent record be agency service and every site at which that is offered have a separate site record. Okay? If the service varies from one site to another, then just make an agency record, not an agency service record, but just an agency record, and have either service or site service records for every unique instance of the way that that service is delivered. So if there's variation in the service that requires you to capture multiple services because they're a little bit different from one another depending on where they're delivered, then you shouldn't put the service record in the agency. You should make the agency be just an agency and then create a combination of service and service site records as required to cover all of the variations in the service and all of the site locations that are offered. So that's my recommendation. You don't have to do it that way, but that's what will be, in my opinion, the easiest for you to maintain at the moment. If you have one of those awful number 4 records, the multiple locations and services where it's just a gigantic mishmash of everything, agency, its own record. Have a record just about the agency, no sites, no services, nothing else, just an agency record. That allows you to more easily determine where all the information is. You don't have pieces of it in one record and pieces of it in another record. You should, as rigidly as possible, organize the records under that agency to be consistent. So identify unique site records and then the service records under that, and if necessary, site service records where the service varies by location. Again, not a requirement to do it that way, but if you leave it in a mishmash like this, where you have agency site service, site here, this is site service, and you basically have 10 different variations of records under this agency that are all a mishmash of different kinds of content, which a lot of you have, that's going to be very difficult for you to maintain in the long term because it's going to be hard for you to remember where the content is. So although you don't have to reorganize that record, you may find that it's easier on you to split those records up and reorganize them a little rather than try and maintain them in whatever organization that they are today. If you have to split up records, so if you have one of those very complex agencies that has a bazillion sites and services, and you decide that you are going to create separate site records and you are going to create a separate agency record, the best way to do that is using the copy record tool. So if I have an agency site service record and I want to split up the agency from the site and the service, I'm going to make 2 extra copies of that record. I'm going to remove the information that doesn't apply from each of the extra copies so that what I'm left with at the end is just one agency record, which should be, the agency record should be the record that already existed, and then the copies should each be of the service and the site as applicable, and you would just remove the information that didn't apply from the copies. The relationships should copy everything except the parent agency, which is why it's important if you do this copying and splitting that the one that you keep is the agency record. There's a question. A mention about the site description being left empty. Okay. I'll get to that, Michelle. Thanks. So that's the deal on agency records. Again, you don't have to follow these guidelines, but you may find that if you don't, then keeping track of where the information is could become very difficult. So review your records by going into the agency record whenever you're going to do a regular update. So this is not go through your entire database and completely reorganize all your information. Not at all. But if I'm updating this agency record, it is a good time to say, let's review the structure of this agency. What kind of a record, an agency is this record? I would look at it, I'd see, oh, it's got 3 sites, 4 services. That's not an even number, which means at least in some of these cases, the service is offered at multiple sites, okay? Or multiple services are offered at the same site or whatever. If the number's uneven, that's a dead giveaway that you've got some kind of complex relationship going on here between sites and services. That tells me this is a number 4 record. This is a complicated record. Maybe I need to review this record and find out if it would be easier to maintain if I broke it up into smaller, more manageable pieces, and the relationships weren't quite so complex between the records. So it's something to do over time. This is not go through your database and revolutionize and copy a bunch of records and make new records. Not at all. In the course of your regular data management, as you are regularly reviewing a record, it's worth going into the parent agency, understanding what kind of record that agency is, and deciding whether you can simplify your maintenance of that record by making small changes to the way that the record is organized. I'm getting lots of questions about things that are a little bit later in my discussion. So Michelle and Barry, both of your things are will be covered a little bit later. So I'm not going to get into them now, but good questions. Okay, so that's all I have to say about agency records, well, separate agency records. We're going to talk very briefly about agencies outside your catchment. More information will be coming and more guidance will be coming, at least to the 211 data providers in Ontario, about how to cope with out-of-catchment agencies. This is a big issue. What has happened in many databases now is a bit of a mishmash between, in some cases, identifying a record in another database, in some cases making your own copies of an agency, you know, a whole bunch of different strategies to try and cope with agency records that didn't exist in the home database. This is really not a good situation. So this is something that is not a later. This is something that really needs to be addressed in the short term. And there are a few ways that that's going to happen. So for anyone not working in a model like Ontario where you're contributing to a community repository, you can do whatever you want. It doesn't matter because your records are your records. You're not sharing data with anyone else. You can make out-of-catchment records all you like, and it doesn't matter. But in Ontario, where all of your records are going into a common repository, there's a really big issue with not properly identifying out-of-catchment records and linking them appropriately. A couple of the bad things that can happen are, number one, overwriting someone's real record with your fake record. That's probably the worst. So if you've created your own agency record and you've used the real record number from someone else's database to try and link it appropriately, and you send your fake record into the communal repository, you could potentially obliterate somebody's real data with your fake data. That is not good. So that's a big no-no. If you have a record in your database that you have either imported or used the record number from an external partner database, you may not send that into the common repository, period. It must not be sent into the common repository, or you have a very high risk of destroying real data with either your copy or your fake data. So that's a no-no. If you've created your own copy of the agency, but with your own record number, so you haven't gone and identified what the record number is in a partner database where the record would be in catchment. So let's say the agency is run out of Ottawa and I'm in Guelph, and I haven't even made the attempt to find out what the record number might be, or if Ottawa has that record. I've just created my own copy, linked all my records to it with my own record number. So there's zero risk there of overwriting Michelle's record because they have totally different record numbers. So that's good. But what will happen in that situation is if you send a record into the provincial repository, we're going to have two of the same record. One of them in catchment from Ottawa, and one of them that's a copy that shouldn't exist, that came from Guelph. Not a good scenario. If I try and not have that happen by not sending that agency record into the shared repository, because I say, oh, that's out of catchment, I shouldn't send that, what happens is the sites and services come in totally disconnected from their agency. The agency record doesn't exist. There's no way to connect it to the real parent agency that might be coming in from Ottawa because it's not linked to the same record number. So that means that the sites and services are not importable into iCarol. They can't be properly constructed as a whole agency with all its sites and services. So that's no good either. So what should you do? Number one, the first ideal thing you should do, if at all possible, is identify the in-catchment record in a partner database. If you can do it, you should. You should find out what the record number is. If you can get a copy of it, excellent. If you can't actually get a copy of the record, then go ahead and construct your own. Use the real record number, but never, ever export that record back because you don't own it. So it's completely fine to have a record in your database that uses the real record number from an out-of-catchment database, but don't send it into the provincial repository. Okay? So even if you've received a copy of it officially from the person who maintains that record, it's not yours to export. So do not ever export a record that has a record number from another database out of your database. Never. If you are unable to get even the record number from the home database, so that person doesn't maintain that record, or they don't send it to the provincial repository, or who knows why. If you absolutely cannot get the record number from the home database, then you may need to create your own version of it. It should be your version. It should have your own record number, and you should identify it as an out-of-catchment record. In Ontario, we're doing that with the tag 211 not web. I'll put it here. So 211 not web. Okay? This publication code is being used to allow you to send in agencies and records that you would not normally send, that are not part of your catchment, that are not normal 2.1 records, and so on, into the common repository, but leaving us able to identify that that is not a record that you should normally have. Okay, so if you get into a situation where you have to have this agency record, you cannot get it from its home database, you can't even get the record number from the home database for some reason, you would create your own copy of the record in that situation, at least temporarily, but you would tag it so that it was obvious that this was an out-of-catchment record. You would send it into the provincial repository. Okay? There may be cases in the future where the creation of local agencies will be allowed. This is yet to be determined, but it's possible that there may be some allowances for really large agencies that have hundreds of sites and services to be broken down into departments or divisions so that there are fewer sites and services associated with the agency. And that may allow you to create a local record for what might be a provincial organization, because that provincial organization is so enormous that breaking it down into smaller regional divisions is helpful. But that will be something that will be communicated to you in the data standards about when to do that and for which organizations. So it's something that you may be okay to do in the future, but it should be done following the official recommendations of the data standards that you're using, and not just, oh, I'd really like my own local version of Service Canada, so I'm going to create my division in my database that's my own and separate from everyone else's. Those kinds of decisions shouldn't be made arbitrarily, because it will be a mess when it comes into the common repository. Are there any questions about outside my catchment records? All the 2.1 data providers will be receiving documentation from Christy about these out-of-catchment records. So this is just an overview, and you'll get something in writing about managing these out-of-catchment records. Okay. Next. So we talked about, do I have to make a separate agency record, and now we're going to talk about, do I have to make a separate site record? So you might find it easier to maintain the record if you have a separate site record. It's a judgment call that you'll have to make. However, there's a gotcha on this one, which makes it a very different situation from the agency situation. The agency, splitting agencies is very clear, because you should always have just one instance of the agency, period, and there really is no question about how you would organize agency, because the agency is the pinnacle of the hierarchy. There's one at the top. It's very organized and clear. Site records are a bit more challenging, mainly for the reason that we have all of these site service records that represent variations of services at a site. And the other thing is that for now in CIOC, we're not pulling site information into the service record automatically for you, meaning you're still having to maintain the located in community and potentially the site address in order to do geolocation searching for your service records. So you don't get a heck of a lot of benefit for creating a separate site record, because you still have to put all the site information into your service record in order to have all of the site searching working. That's something that's likely to change within the next 3 to 4 months, I would expect, meaning that within 3 to 4 months, maybe 6 months at the most, you will be able to automatically have the site information included when you search for services, and it will no longer be necessary to maintain copies of the site address and the mailing address and the located in community, all of that in the service record in order to have it be searchable and in order to see it in the record details. And because of that, this is not the time to split your site and service records. Wait. My recommendation officially is don't spend any of your effort splitting up site and service records, because 6 months or less, probably quite a lot less than that, we'll have a tool for you to do that automatically, number one. And two, at that time, you'll no longer have to duplicate the site information in the service record. And so you'll be saving yourself a lot of effort at that point by making that change. So that's a change that will eventually be very helpful and beneficial to you, to potentially split up site service records if you have multiple services at the same site. You gain almost nothing from doing it today. So you can do it if you want to, but it just means more information for you to maintain in most cases, because you're still having to maintain the site information in with the service anyway. So officially, wait. You'll want to do this eventually. You'll have the tools to do it automatically, so that you won't actually have to copy records and delete fields and all of that messy business that would be needed to split records. There will be tools to let you do it just by saying split this record. So it'll be easier to do later, and also we'll be eliminating the need to duplicate the site information. And so you'll get a lot more out of the work by waiting a few months and doing it when those tools are available. Okay, there's a question. Can we reference an out-of-catchment record number as parent without recreating it in your own database? Yes. So the question here is, do you have to have the agency record in your database, or can you just use the record number? The answer is, you can just use the record number. You don't have to have it in your database. I'm going to give some, here I'm going to flip over to Michelle's database. I'm going to give an example. I can find one here. Give me a moment so I can find an appropriate. I don't think you have the field I want in this view. Okay, I'll guess. Okay. Need to switch to the agency site service view here. Okay. This one's got it. Sorry, I'm not quite ready for this. I want to be able to show the parent agency. There we go. Okay. Oh, everything except the record I picked, obviously. So this one has no, it just has a parent agency record number. That record doesn't exist in this database. So you can see that this is entirely possible to do. It allows you to simply provide the agency record number without having that agency in your database. You lose a lot of the ability to understand the structure of the records in your database if you don't have at least a construction of an agency in your database, even if that's you making a shell record that has that same record number. There's a major advantage to doing it, because you can then access that agency record. You can look at all the services and sites that you have in your database for that same agency. There really is significant advantage in terms of data management and reviewing of records and understanding relationships that you get even if you just make a completely fake shell record with the same record number. And that's okay to do as long as you don't export that fake record back into the shared provincial repository. That's when you end up causing a problem. But if you choose not to, that's completely fine. Okay, and one of the things that I'm going to show you today is a new state search most of you should have, which is the one I just ran in Michelle's database, that identifies records where you don't have the parent agency record number, or you have to a parent agency record that's deleted. So this is a deleted record. This is a deleted record. This is a deleted record. Anything that shows up is deleted, and anything that's blank means you don't have that record in your database. That's okay. You're going to have to work extra hard to stay on top of that record. Did that record get deleted in the home database? Have I associated all of the records for that agency to the same record number? It's really hard to tell if you don't have a parent agency in your database. Whereas if I had even made a fake record for Alzheimer's Society, let's just say I decided to make a fake record, I can go into my fake record and tell that these have all been linked to the same record and that they all are sort of properly associated with one another as they should be. If I don't have even the fake record in my database, it's really hard for me to tell without some work that I've linked them all to the same Alzheimer's Society record, right? It's more work. It's not obvious. So there's your short answer and long answer. Sure, you can do it, but you might decide that you're better off even if all you do is make a basic fake record with the correct record number if you can't get a copy of it. If that didn't answer your question, go ahead and let me know, and I'll see what else I can elaborate on. All right, so again, the site records, splitting site records, you might want to do it now in some cases, but I think you'll find that if you wait just a few months, this will be an easier task for you to do, involve less work for you, and you'll get more of a benefit from it. So hold off on that is my advice. Now we come to one of the most tricky situations, which is why do I need more than one copy of the same service? I have licensed child care programs offered, 10 of them offered by the same agency. Can I make one service record called Licensed Child Care Center, or do I need to have multiple different service records? And the answer is unclear. So the issue we have is that the format that we use to interchange data in the AIRS XML format doesn't allow any explanation of how services might vary based on where they're being delivered. So we call this a program at site record, a case where it's a similar service offered at multiple locations, but there's some difference in the way that the service is offered depending on where it's offered, and we have to capture those differences. And so for the moment, in both CIOC and in the AIRS XML format, we have no choice but to maintain those as totally separate service records. We have little tricks to try and tie them together a bit to make it clear that these are similar services so that you can easily bring up all of the similar services and see the locations where they're offered. That's done through the site name piece. But for now, it will be up to you to do a thorough review of the services and determine whether the service, a service that is offered at multiple locations, is exactly the same at every location it is offered, or whether there is a variation that requires you to create separate services for each service delivery location. To make this easier on you, I've highlighted the fields that are most likely to vary based on location. So these are service fields that are most likely to be different based on service delivery location, and you need to check these fields before you can make a decision about whether you need separate service records. So that's all the phone fields, the contact fields, areas served, boundaries, hours, dates, and meetings, languages, and description. If any of those vary, you must create separate service records. The one potential exception is the description, because you could potentially say in the description, you know, at blah blah location, this is different. So there are, as long as you are willing to, say, put in the description that there is a slight variation based on service delivery location, you might be able to get away with it in that case. But anything that is really specific, like boundaries, where you must live in a particular area in order to qualify, if there's residential requirements, that's not something necessarily that you can easily do separately. I mean, you could, I suppose, decide to put every single location's boundaries into the boundaries field, up to you. But you would need to make sure that you actually did that. What you cannot do is pick randomly one of the services and say, I'm going to make this one the official record for the service, and then just ignore the fact that there's variation at all of the other locations. Because when this information comes together, the only thing that's going to get exported is the one you've picked as the service, and all of that variation based on location will be lost if you don't identify each of those services separately. So again, for the time being, this is a temporary thing as we work on changing the standards of how we share data to allow us to capture these differences in services between locations. But that could take a year to do. So this is not a short-term issue. It is a temporary issue because we will work on it, but it's not a short-term issue. And it's a situation you'll have to live with for, I would say, at least a year probably before we can get changes in the standards to allow us to deal with this situation and have you only need to put in a variation of, say, the hours field, or only a variation of the areas served field, and then still keep one record for everything else. So familiarize yourself with this list of fields. These are the ones you have to check. If there's variation based on service delivery location in any of these fields, that means you have to have separate service records. If they're all exactly the same, you can get away with having a single service record linked to multiple locations. For anyone who was in the name tool demo last week, you can use the 2-level service name field to allow you to identify records that have similarities. Let's see if I can remember the name. There we go. This is my special record here. Here we go. So you can use the 2-level naming field to allow similar services to be linked together so that you can understand that there are similar services. They'll be listed next to each other in the list of services, as you see here, where they're all called Child Care Center in their level 1 of their service name, and then the level 2 of their service name distinguishes them based on their site in this case. So that is the best way to identify this program at site situation. If you have to capture them in separate records, make sure that their naming is consistent. Use the level 1 name to bring commonality to the service so that you can easily bring up a list of similar services, and use the level 2 name to distinguish one from another so that you can understand when viewing a list of services why this child care center is different from this child care center. If you name them all the same, you'll just have a list here that says Child Care Center, Child Care Center, Child Care Center, Child Care Center, and someone doing INR or data management will have no idea what the difference between one and the other is. So it's really important that you use naming to help you distinguish between these program at site records so that it's clear why there is a variation between them. Okay, the next question I get of sort of, why do I have this weird situation is why do I have extra records that have no classification? So it's possible for you to have gone through the classification process and end up with records that you don't seem to need. The site information in the record is captured elsewhere. The service information in the record is captured elsewhere. And it seems like you don't need that record for anything. There's nothing to classify. So what do you do with these records? So eventually you'll be getting rid of those records, but you can't yet. The reason that you can't get rid of them yet is we still in CIOC rely on the site and service information being together in a record in order to do both geographic and service information searching at the same time. For instance, I want to find a service located 5 kilometers from my postal code. In order to do that today, you have to have geographic information in the same record as your service. we can't search across 2 records at the same time. The work that I was talking about when we were discussing, do I have to make separate site records, is the same changes that will influence this extra record problem, and that you will be getting changes to your software that automatically display service information when you're looking at a site and site information when you're looking at a service, so that you're not having to duplicate that information. If I maintain a service record, it will be unnecessary to put separate address information in or separate located in community, because we'll automatically pull that information out of any site that that service is associated with. If I bring up a site record, it will list all the sites at which that service is offered, and I'll be able to get details on any of them right while I'm looking at it. Similarly, when you do a search, you'll be able to, it will look in all of the sites that that service is offered and automatically search both the service information and the pertinent site information together at the same time to give you the search result you need. But you don't have it yet. So for now, you're stuck with these sort of strange orphaned records that appear to be extra and unneeded. Until those software changes come in, just leave them. Ignore them. They don't. You'll still send them into the provincial repository unclassified for now because they're needed on 211ontario.ca. But in the long run, they will disappear. They will be gone. You won't need them anymore. It will just be one less thing for you to maintain. Okay. Will I ever need more than one copy of an agency or site? So I talked earlier very briefly about the potential for standards to help you decide when it might be pertinent to make a divisional or regional record, because the agency is so enormous that it's unmanageable. You just can't cope with the number of sites and services that fall under the very highest parent agency. So that's a case where legitimately you might have more than one agency that technically at the highest level is all part of the same agency. So yes, there is a very limited set of circumstances under which you would have more than one instance of the same agency in your database, but they're not going to be identical. They're going to, and there's going to be very specific standards-based reasons for having more than one of the same agency, okay? There is never a reason to have more than one site for the same agency. The asterisk is for the same agency. So for a single agency, you should never have 2 copies of the same physical location. You should never have 2 records designated as a site that are at the same place. That is never, there's never a case where that's okay. But it is totally possible to have the same physical space used by more than one agency for different services. Churches are often used in this way, where obviously the church itself uses the site for its own faith-based reasons, but they might run an earlier center program out of it, or a Montessori nursery, or a food box program, or any number of other things that are run by different agencies out of the same site. Each of those agencies has their own unique site record representing that place. So you would not try and use the church's site record for your food box program that's run by a separate nonprofit. Okay, that separate nonprofit would have a site location named that church. Okay, so it is a distinct site because it's a distinct agency. Within an agency, you only ever have one instance of each site. Any questions about that? Okay, we're almost at the end. I've gone through a bit of the updating records, the basics, but these are the fundamental steps I hope you'll keep in mind when you do your updating. Number 1 is no changes to the maintenance of standalone records, which we talked about earlier. There's a few new bits of description and name that you'll need to pay attention to, but you don't really have to think too much about the structure of the record for standalone agencies where there's one site, one service. They're still pretty much the same to maintain as they've always been. Every record update should begin with visiting the parent agency record, assuming you have one, so that you can review the list of sites and services that that agency offers. It's a way for you to have in your head while you're doing your update whether any of the changes that you make are likely to affect other records from the same agency. Now that the records don't stand alone, that they're all interconnected with one another, and as they start to actually borrow information from one another for searching purposes and display, you can no longer treat the record as an independent entity. You have to think about how the changes that you're making are going to impact all of the related records around the one that you're updating. So the first place to start is always go into that parent agency record and look at the list of sites and services that are offered at that agency. It's a very good time as well to look at your naming to see if you're naming sites and services consistently and in a way that's going to make it easy for someone to find the record, determine whether you have a similar service offered at different sites, and all of those sorts of things. So a good moment, if you're looking in the agency anyway, take a second, review the naming, and get an understanding of what that agency does and how any changes that you are going to make to any of its sites and services might impact other records. Before you update a service, you should understand whether that service is offered at more than one location. If the service changes, you have to know whether or not that service has changed at this location or at all the locations, and you may find that you have to start following up with the agency to clarify if you are at all unsure about whether a change impacts the service at just one spot or at all of the locations at which that service is delivered. When you update a site record, you have to think about whether physical location changes might impact other records that are linked to it. So if a site moves, are all the services still offered at that site after it has moved? You know, what has changed? If you can no longer just consider that as an independent record, anything that's linked to it needs to be reconsidered as well. And unfortunately, that does make the process of updating records a little more complicated because you may find that you need to follow up with the agency if it's unclear whether a particular change has impacted other records. And the final note there is just remember that changing a record that has any relationships to other records, whether it's you're changing an agency and it has sites and services, you're changing a service and it's offered at other locations, or a site that has multiple services, you have to not consider the record in isolation. You have to think about it in terms of how it's related to the other records around it. And that means not just going right into your data entry form when you have feedback, but actually looking through the record first, looking at the relationships that record has and how it fits in to the big picture of the services and sites that the agency provides. Deleting a record has gotten slightly more complicated because if the record has relationships, you need to consider the impact to all of the associated records. Whenever you delete an agency record, you need to follow that up by deleting all of its sites and services. If you are deleting a site record, you have to figure out whether there's service records linked to it and whether or not you also have to delete those service records or just delete the association of that service to that deleted location. So if the record is anything other than a standalone record and you are deleting it, you must first review all the relationships that that record has with other records to see what the impact is going to be. I've created this new saved search that I just ran here, 311. I'll be creating another one specifically for sites, 312, that you'll all have in your database. That's hopefully going to allow you to identify cases where you've accidentally deleted an agency and not its services, or you have a service associated with a deleted record as its parent agency. This is obviously a huge issue. You're either going to have to restore the agency record associated with a new record, or maybe you find out that you need to delete the service record because the whole agency is closed down. I mean, there's lots of scenarios there, but this represents a problem So anything that comes up where it's identifying that you've got a deleted record, and again, the difference here is if it shows the name, it's a deleted record. If it doesn't show the name, it means you don't have that record in your database. Okay, so that's how you can tell the difference. And we'll do a similar one up for sites. The sites one is a little more complicated because maybe that site closed down, but the service is still in operation, and that's perfectly okay as long as you still have at least one site for that service, and there may not be a problem. But it does mean that it's good policy when you close a site down to delete all of the links to services. So if I've decided that the downtown office is closed, I should go in and delete all the links to services that location had to prevent any sort of funny queries from coming up when it does data quality checks telling me that I've associated things with deleted records. And what will happen if I do that, if I'm very careful about always removing all of the services from a site when I delete it, for example, then the 310 query, which looks for overall classification problems, will automatically pick it up if you've orphaned a service with no site. So it will help you to do the data management and keep on top of it if you remember to remove relationships at the same time as you're deleting the record. Again, with future updates, the expectation is it will either not allow you to delete a record that has relationships, or it will automatically prompt you to remove those relationships at the time you delete the record so that you won't have to remember to do that. But until those tools are in place, you have to follow a very careful process when you're deleting records. Keeping your data in check. This is the safe searches that most of you already know that they need to be running your database, at least if you were involved in the classification. If you weren't and you have never seen these safe searches before, understand that you can have access to them. They are put in your database by me, and if they're not already in your database, I can put them there for you. If they're in your database and you don't have access to them, you just have to tell me what your user type is, and I'll give you access. Okay, so the way that you would look for it is by going to your, in your main menu, you would go to your saved searches, and in the shared searches, you should see these 1.1, 1.2, et cetera, if you don't see them, then you can either contact me to find out if they're already in your database, give me your user type, and I will share that search with you. So from when I'm editing my, saved searches, I see a list of user types, and I just have to tick off the ones for whoever wants to have access. So all you have to do is give me your user type, and I'll check it off and make sure that you get access to all of those data quality searches so that you can keep on top of it yourself. Data quality searches should be done minimally weekly. More frequently certainly isn't a problem. So if you want to run them more often than that, there's no trouble in doing that. I've highlighted the specific ones that should be done on a really regular basis. And again, I'm going to add one more specifically to do with deleted sites. If you fail these queries, you have what I would consider a very significant data quality problem. Either you're missing basic information about the record, like it has no geography, it has no taxonomy, it has an incomplete address, no description. I mean, these are very fundamental, basic data quality issues. Or the classification has some kind of a significant problem. Records with no agency, services with no site, really major, significant classification problems. And then finally, we have, we're going to have the two queries that are going to help you to identify cases where you've deleted records that are related to other records, so you can evaluate whether there's a problem there because of that. There are a bunch of email data quality searches. Most of you have too many records in your database to run them because they're really slow. So you will periodically receive a list of invalid email addresses in your database, which you should act on. Usually it's typos that need to be fixed, because obviously that's just a basic data quality issue. It's nothing special to do with the classification process, but the AIR standard through which all of these records are being passed when they go into, say, iCarol, they have to pass all of these data quality checks in order to do that. So although it in some ways is separate from the classification process, it's still a requirement that your data pass these checks and be that in order to be valid. Final question of the day, and then I'll leave it open if anyone has any general questions. Do I really have to classify all my records? It's a very familiar refrain. Yes. Yes, you do. Understandably, not everyone could classify all their records to begin with. Some people have enormous numbers of records, and the focus really was on the records needed for 211 INR, and particularly the records that are part of the 211 public database. But yes, in the long run, you need to do all your records. I expect within 6 months that anyone using agency site service features will be into a rigid structure that's going to start yelling at you and not allowing you to create records outside of that structure. So that wouldn't apply to people who aren't using the agency site service model, but if you're using it, you're not going to be able to use it in a half-and-half way anymore. So understanding that even if you're getting away right now with having some of your records not classified and some of them classified, that's temporary because it's not going to last. The software is not going to let you have it in a half-and-half format in the long term. So you should be working to have all your records classified in your database. It also means that the data quality checks are going to be a more effective tool for you and not returning a whole bunch of noise if all your records are treated similarly and being properly classified. As I mentioned earlier, there are ways around things like research records where you're just not ready to provide it with a meaningful classification. Make yourself a research record agency and make them all topic records. There's ways around it so that you can continue to do your work the way that you need to do it, but still maintain the integrity of the classification and make sure that all your data quality searches run and that everything keeps working. Okay? So that's it for my presentation today. I know that's a huge overload of information. I'm hoping it's enough of an introduction that when you receive written instructions and written documentation, that having heard about some of it and seen some of it, that it's easier for you to use that documentation as a tool. If I need to do another session on a specific narrower part of this, then I will, but you'll have to let me know. Okay, question. Oh, sorry, I'm having trouble bringing up questions here. Here we go. Oh, and I've almost forgotten something. In the document, the older documents, so the really detailed one, at the very bottom of it is a very important appendix that everyone should familiarize themselves with, and that is the mapping of where CIOC data goes when it goes through the AIR's XML format. So if you want to understand what happens to data, what goes in and what doesn't, this is the place to see it. Okay. Someone had specifically asked about hours and dates and meetings and so on going in. I tried to note that, so here I have dates, yes, as part of hours. I think we've made some changes since I last did this, which I will update in my new document, like meetings, I believe, is also now coming in as part of hours. So this should tell you if things are going together into the same place. I'll provide an updated version of this in the new document, the same table that includes any changes we've made about the mapping so that you know where your data is going. Okay. question about where the documents will be sent. So I will be, when I have finished refining the documents, I will be posting them on the community site. They will go, let me show you where I put them. So they'll go under resources and under either how to or quick references, I'm not sure yet. And I will be emailing out a link to the document to the alert list. So I'm assuming everyone here is on the alert list, because otherwise how would you know about this meeting? If you're not, then from the main page of the community site, there's also a link here to sign up for alerts. And that's where I will send the link to the document. Michelle had asked about site description and there being an automatic site description. Right now, when data goes into iCareOS, there's no site description. There is something put in there automatically, but it's very simple. It simply says site location for and then agency name. So it's extremely, extremely basic. But there is some kind of a site location being, or site description being put in automatically at the moment when information is exported to iCareOS. Okay, any other questions? Sorry I've run late. I think an hour and a half is a bit ambitious. The document should be ready tomorrow, Wednesday. And again, the link to it will go out on the CIOC alert list, and it will be posted here on the CIOC community site in the resources section. And I believe that in addition to that, Michelle from Ottawa is also working on a more comprehensive instructional document for data managers to assist them in their work. And it may be that we decide that he'll just incorporate my notes and we'll just publish his document, so I'll need to talk to him about what makes the most sense.